You make a bunch of noise out here, so they have peace and quiet in here. Because there's no better sound than the squeak-free guarantee from Advantech Subflooring and Advantech Subfloor Adhesive.
Welcome to the UnBuild It podcast. I'm joined today by my usual co-hosts, Peter Yost and Steve Basic.
Hey, Jake.
Howdy.
Gentlemen. And we're going to jump right in today. We have a couple listener questions that I'm going to read for us, and they kind of follow along a theme, but I think you'll catch on with this theme. So our first question comes from Jeff.
Hey, Jeff.
Hello, Jeff. Thank you for writing in. Very excited to hear Jeff's question.
And now I'm definitely not reading Jeff's last name. I just started watching your YouTube channel after seeing some of your stuff on Matt Reisinger's channel. One question I've always had about the sill plate to foundation interface is why no one shifts the sill plate inward so that the sheathing is flush with the foundation wall. Seems like it would be easier and more robust for sealing it, especially if using tape. Trying to seal a L-shaped interface is kind of awkward with tape, possibly leading to wrinkles in the tape if not wet out carefully. Maybe it's just the sheathing creates a full shingle over that sill foundation interface to shed water past it. So his theory makes kind of good sense on the surface, right? No pun intended there. Like if everything were perfectly straight, it would be easier to tape or to liquid flash or whatever. So why do we not do that? Either one of you want to share some testing that I know with the testing that you're going to reference here, because Steve puts it up in presentations with moisture meters and whatnot. Like let's have a conversation. Why don't we do this?
Yeah, we tested it in North Carolina, if you remember. Mm-hmm. Right? And in a 3-foot delta, we went from like 19% moisture content to 8.9 in about 3 feet.
8.9.
Yeah.
Mine like a steel trap.
It was
he's got he gave the presentation in the last 2 weeks. He's looked at the pictures.
Yeah.
So you're saying at the bottom edge of the sheathing panel, and this was a zip panel, right?
It was a zip panel.
So it was a
but it was also
OSB.
untaped.
Yep.
It was untaped.
Yep.
So the issue there is untaped, water gets down, it sits on top of that concrete shelf, it gets wicked up by the zip board.
Well, untaped and not covered.
And not the
So
house.
didn't
the
have
house was
cladding on
being
it
framed,
either.
Right.
So the bottom edge of the panel, or the bottom first 6 inches of the sheathing panel, the moisture meter read at 19% or something.
Yes.
And then you went vertically 3 feet in the same panel, and the moisture dropped by
8.9, yeah, by over half.
Yeah, and just as a point of reference, the moisture meters read, the pin type moisture meters read with a percent moisture content by weight, and kiln dried's about 8%. Anywhere between 8 and 13 is great. When you get into the 15 range, that's sometimes where you can have trouble getting paint or sealants to adhere with that moisture content. And then when you get up to 19, we're talking about a good condition for mold. And then you get up to 25 or higher and you get to rot.
Is there a difference at 19% between wood species or substrates?
Yeah, absolutely. You either have to do a correction for spruce, pine, fir is the reference, and then there's correction tables for things like OSB, plywood, different species of wood, unless you have like the Delmhorst BDX 30, which has a scale for plywood, for OSB, and then for all the species built into the meter.
So we're going to go kind of on a tangent here, because we've been dealing with this. We got a engineered wood floor on one of our projects. You and I talked about this recently, that we got in, and we were getting readings in the like 18, 19, 20% as it came out of the box. And we contacted the rep, and the rep was like, leave it in the box. It'll acclimate over the next few days. Don't worry about it. And the building's reading, the subfloor's reading at like 9%, which is what we would expect. It's been down for a while. The building's conditioned and everything. And a week out of the stuff being in the building, the floor being in the building, it's still reading at like 17 or 18. Like it hasn't moved at all. And we have a Delmhorst and we're getting that same reading. And so then we call the rep back and he calls the manufacturer and they're like, we'll send you a different meter. And now I can't remember the name of the meter that they sent us. That's going to hurt the story here.
Warner, maybe?
No. And they're just saying like, oh yeah, you'll get a high reading. And they went back and forth on it happens, basically, is what they were telling us. And they tried to blame our moisture meter as being faulty, but we were getting our Delmhorst, which is a very expensive, high-quality moisture meter, and the garbage moisture meter that the local rep had on hand. We're getting the same reading. And so what was your recommendation, Pete, for us to figure out? Do you remember what you told me to do?
I have no idea what I told you to do, but I have 3 different topics that I would like to include as part of this discussion.
Well, you told me to take it to our office and stick it in the oven.
That was going to be one of the things. The cool thing about doing moisture content by weight is that with a good scale, you can just drive all the moisture out of that material and get the dry weight, and now you have a reference point for the percent content. The problem is that the moisture has to come out of the cellular structure of the wood. And even in an oven, that takes time.
Yeah.
Secondly, when you add adhesive...
In other words, a weekend, we left it in the oven for 72 hours.
Yeah, and when I did it in my house, I got a lot of grief about what the odor was like inside while we were baking the crap out of the OSB. But if you have just wood structure, there's a pretty easy pathway out of the cell structure to evaporate. But with OSB and plywood, now all of a sudden you've got very dense, low moisture movement adhesives. So it's going to take you longer to drive moisture out of engineered products than it is the wood. The other thing is that about different moisture meters, Delmhorst is one of the few firms. Steve and I have actually been to their manufacturing facility in New Jersey. They have done hours and hours and hours of gravimetric, which means weighing to truth test their moisture readings. And most of the other meters simply take apart a Delmhorst to then, kind of calibrate their moisture meter to the Delmhorst. So it's like an industry standard.
Yeah.
But the other question I think we were going to get back to was, what about how you detail the bottom edge of the bottom course of your structural sheathing? And I think there's 2 things there. One is we first want to drain the bottom edge of both the cladding and the sheathing. That should be our first detail. And then the second detail is the backup of how do I protect that rough edge that's the only unprotected part of the OSB panel if it's faced. So I think the chances of getting a capillary break between the bottom edge of the OSB is pretty low if you're doing it flush to the edge of the foundation, because the foundation's varying in and out and up and down, and so now, are you sure you've left that bottom edge up high enough so it's not going to, with the variations of foundation, make contact? And definitely, if you throw the sheathing and let it go past on the outside, you have a much better chance of keeping that. The gap is now between the inside edge of the sheathing and the outside edge of the foundation. So there's a lot of moving parts here, and the question is, which one gives the best protection for both draining the bottom edge of the OSB, but also then preventing there being capillary communication between the top of the foundation and the sheathing.
Does the code address it at all? Does the code say whether or not it needs to be outboard? I don't know if it does.
Well, the code addresses wood being in contact with concrete and not being.
It does, but you
treated.
could buy a wider sill sealer. Right.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I don't like it. I like having the OSB or plywood, whatever you're using, hanging out there and being able to dry to the bottom. I mean, I don't even like using the tape down there. I'd rather seal it at the mud sill and then seal the sheathing to the mud sill. That's my preferred detail. But because that allows for ultimate drying of that panel.
So this is really interesting because what you're saying is I'd like to keep the rough edge of the bottom of that sheathing exposed to dry.
Yeah.
Other folks are saying, no, I want to protect it from getting wet.
But how does it get wet?
Well, there you go. There you go.
I mean, I don't know.
Well,
but yeah.
You do your details at the bottom of the wall with some sort of flashing detail that makes sure that the water drains where you want it to, not rolling back in against the sheathing.
Well, and the other two things to think about that you kind of touched on. One, when was the last time you ever saw a perfect? Like I work with some very good builders, and even then they're grinding the foundation, right? So if you say you're going to put that in, because at that same job, remember what happened? We heard a jackhammer
on a brand new
construction site, and we went over there, and the little ledge that they had in the middle of the house, it was out about an inch.
Yeah, at least
and the building inspector told them that they had to hammer that flush with the panel. So the idea of it's not so much about hanging the panel over, it's the foundation has to be true level, right? It has to be true kind of in and out, but it also has to have perfectly true 90-degree angles at every corner.
Yeah.
Right? So if you don't have that, then you can't really compensate for, we'll just move everything in a half an inch or 7/16 and we'll seat the panel on there. Because chances are some of it's either going to be overhanging or some of the foundation is going to be exposed or something. The beauty of overhanging the system is when you go to square up your mud sills, maybe this mud sill hangs over the corner a quarter of an inch here or an eighth of an inch to get that true 90. So it provides corrective measure if we don't do that detail. And then lastly, that detail really mucks up architectural drawings because now I have to make sure my wall frame is set in 7/16 or a half an inch to my foundation plan. So my coordination plan isn't okay, the foundation's 34 feet, my out frame is 34 feet. No, it's 33 and an eighth now or whatever it is to compensate. And those are numbers no framer wants to chase.
That's really interesting. I never thought about that from that perspective.
Right? So, I don't know. My opinion is I think this is a conversation that is a reason to have a conversation. I don't think there's any legitimacy to this conversation in my eyes.
Just to tell us how you really feel.
Well, I'm just saying. I appreciate Jeff writing in, but you asked my opinion, I'm going to give it to you. I don't.
You just made a comment that this is a slight aside. The no framer wants to chase those numbers. My son is in high school and he's taking an architectural drafting class, and he sent me a screenshot of one of their projects was redesigning the cooking classroom. And he was like, hey, we got to redesign the cooking classroom, and they're going to use our design next year for the renovation.
Whoa.
Check it out. And he was like, what do you think? And I said, no framer is going to deal with 13 feet, 3 1/4 inches. It needs to be 13 foot 3.
Yeah.
And he said, it's existing. And I was like, damn, he's right. Like, it is. Like, those windows are existing, and he's marking off those windows. That's the only time it works. And he said, my architecture teacher said the same thing. And and I was like, oh, well, good. The high school architecture teacher was like, cut that 1/4 inch crap out immediately. Like, thank goodness that an architecture teacher actually was teaching that. 'Cause
Yeah, I mean, we have
that's the first
tolerances.
thing my framer would be like, no, which way you want me to move it? You want me to move it up or down? Because I'm not doing 1/4 of an inch stuff.
Yeah, we have tolerances in our office. As the details get more detail, as the scale rises in detail, the tolerance is a little bit more loose, meaning our foundation plans, they're usually strictly to a 2-foot dimension. And basically our floor plans are the same, but then you might get into something where we get down to 1/4 of an inch or something like that. But plans, very rarely do we tolerate an 1/8 of an inch as a measurement on floor plans. 1/4 of an inch, because if you're putting a 2x4 wall centered to get 2 bedrooms at the wing of a house, you end up with that 1 3/4 spacing to get both Janie and Jill's room exactly the same.
Yeah.
Right. But yeah, it's that whole detail. It's funny because when I was at Artistic Homes, they did that detail. They could get away with it in
They
New Mexico.
flushed?
They flushed it. And it's, I didn't realize it until probably after we had done maybe 3,000 homes. The framer was compensating
Oh, from your drawing.
from my drawing. So I always drew to the outside of the
Interesting.
foundation. He was taking the 1/2 inch off.
Why did they prefer
The framer liked it to do it that way. He was a real, let's say stickler. Like
Yeah.
you weren't changing the way he did things.
Well, I want to go back to this issue of better to have the sheathing flush with the outside edge or to overlap. And I want to look at it from the perspective of which is the best way to protect the untreated surface of the end of the panel. And I don't think there's any question that your chances of keeping that edge from being a moisture problem is way better if you lap it than if you flush it. Okay. But now the question is, how do we protect? Because you said you like to have it open so it can dry. And then Jake said, well, what about splashback or, capillary action from the foundation?
Yeah. The problem with, I think, analyzing something from a building science perspective is where do you stop the analysis, right? So you look at a detail like this and you say, oh, okay, if it's flush, it does this. If it does this, it's fine. But you need to carry building science analysis to, well, what if water got in there, right? And that's what a lot of people don't do out there in the building. They just say, oh, we're going to do this. We're going to keep water out. And that's where their analysis stops.
Right.
But the most important question is the building's never going to get investigated because you kept water out. It's going to get investigated because what if water gets in?
Yeah.
Then what happens? And so I think when you look at that detail and you give that question of what happens if water gets in, I think you understand the problem a lot more.
Well, this is probably a good segue.
I have a second question for us then.
Yeah, this is about the Protecto Wrap?
So
good.
Carla wrote in, watching your
Hello, Carla. You didn't say hi, Carla.
Hi.
Carla.
Oh, Carla, yeah.
Okay.
Great.
Just trying to be
Watching your
respectful.
podcast where you discuss seal sealing, I have some questions. Thinking about using a smart product where I chose to use Protecto Wrap's Triple Seal, which I think is that like
It's T-shape.
T-shape,
yeah.
yep. Where it has an exterior tape that spans from the concrete to the sheathing with an integrated seal gasket with a sticky butyl backing stuck to the foundation. Ideally, this is all you need. However, in listening to your concerns about the bottom of the sheathing being able to dry if it were to get wet, I looked at the perm rating on the tape. They use the product, and it's very low, 0.01, basically vapor closed.
Yep.
I'm now wondering if this will ever be an issue. Blah, 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 blah. Sorry, Carla. It has been properly lapped with Henry Blueskin. So I'm going to skip the rest of her question. So now we have a totally different situation. We have Blueskin coming down the wall over top of this and shingled all the way to the foundation, and the Protecto Wrap, what is it called? Protecto Wrap's Triple Seal.
Yep.
So we have a completely sealed condition here. If assuming, I realize that I'm about to say this and you're probably both going to poo-poo this, assuming the Blueskin is installed properly.
And the Protecto Wrap.
And the Protecto Wrap's installed properly and functioning properly. Do we have the same concern? Because now we have
So I have a fundamental
way
question.
less opportunity for wetting. I don't know if the two products play well together or not, or adhere to each other.
And is she talking about having the sheathing flush to the foundation or lapped?
She doesn't say.
Okay, so this is an important question because I think
with that product you have to, don't you?
well, look at it this way. What if you put the Protecto Wrap and the vertical leg above the foundation was adhered to the outside edge of the mud sill? Okay? So now, and then you lapped your sheathing.
That causes real install problems, like
Why?
order of operation problems.
Well,
Because
why
you're
couldn't
probably
it-
sheathing the wall on
Laying
the
down.
deck,
Yeah, now you got a sheet
and then
standing up.
it's getting nailed
But I'm
off
talking
to
about the mud
sill.
sill. So the
Yeah, I
mud
know
sill's
you're talking. I know the
down.
mud sills. Yep.
I know, but now you got to stand your wall up and nail your studs to your mud sill
Yeah.
after it's up.
Because if you could figure out a way to do it that way, then when the sheathing came down past, you'd have the inside surface of the sheathing protected, and you'd still have the bottom edge of the sheathing to dry to the exterior.
My framer would tell you to go screw yourself.
Yeah.
Or he just would tell you, sure, we'll do that, and then hope that you never come check it because that's not what he's going to do.
I don't know. The other thing is, that is, when you think about it, that is probably one of the most vulnerable areas of the building because it's up the longest unprotected, right? And I say that because and I'm not pointing at any specific, but I've seen a lot of taped solutions there that look like hell 5 or 6 weeks later when they're finally putting the roof on the building. And it becomes a very challenge because splashback there for sure because it's all mud on the outside.
Yep.
There's no roof overhang. So, they're sweeping water off the deck. It splashes back. And you might get it splashed back and then they decide to tape it. And they're taping over the dirt and they're not taping over a nice clean panel like you would want them to.
Okay, so if we are going to tape it, because we use that section as a air seal,
Yes.
what are our best case scenarios there?
I mean, if someone asked me, I'd probably say Sill Fentrum is probably the most aggressive to the concrete, not so much the panel. It's what is going to stick to the concrete very well.
And that is, I think, the only pressure-sensitive adhesive tape that is backed by the manufacturer to adhere to raw concrete. Because all the rest, you have to use a primer on the concrete before you use the tape.
There are a couple other manufacturers that are working on that realm of stuff in the U.S., but nothing that's on the market yet. Zip is got liquid flash. I mean, we use liquid flash. It's vapor open. I mean, it's just as open as Ventrum, if not more, isn't it?
Okay, I'm gonna take what's the word?
It's more labor intensive.
Umbrage or something
Umbrage is a good
word.
take issue with.
Take issue with, yeah.
Umbrage is what you're trying to say.
Yeah. So I see a lot of people on social media. They tape it and then they liquid flash. Like, are you kidding me? Like, yeah. I mean, it's great for the video, but then I do something and people are like, well, how much does that cost? You just had a freaking guy tape 400 linear feet of foundation so they can artistically apply a liquid flash.
We tape on the foundation because we don't want it down further on the foundation so that you can see it.
But
it's a pain in the butt.
I get it. But it's one of those things. And I'm the very first one to say good things cost money. So it's not that I don't think it works. I'm just saying when people come down about, okay, things cost money, and then we're going around and artistically taping off the foundation to ensure we have a nice straight line, it seems a little crazy to me.
I
to
would
have
say
that conversation, not to do it.
Yeah, but I still like the idea of giving the bottom edge of the sheathing the chance to dry rather than protecting it from keeping it wet, getting wet.
And part of me is that's why I like keeping it open, because all of the conversations I've ever had about it, water's going to move through that panel due to gravity. And the highest you're ever going to see the moisture concentration is at the bottom of the panel. And to block that off all of a sudden.
But if you do that detail and you don't have a good kick out flashing at the bottom of your cladding, In other words, if you want to leave that open, you better make sure that all the water coming down the face of that building is shedding out rather than rolling back up against that bottom edge of the sheet.
Yeah, well, we
You see that a lot.
always hang the panel down maybe a half an inch, and then I always call for, like, if we use a wood strapping, we'll hang that down another half an inch, and then the cladding another half inch. So like
it's got-
you're
it's
consecutively
stepped, yeah.
stepping it down below the panel, hopefully.
Okay, now, you've heard me take issue about this before, but I think it's absolutely insane that we require waterproofing on the concrete foundation below grade, and the code says absolutely nothing about doing anything to treat the portion of the foundation that's above grade. Why don't we make that less water resistant, more water resistant?
I think there's such a lower risk of water held in tension and such a increased rate of drying. Yeah, that's why.
I tell you, I go to buildings that don't have gutters, and I look at that portion on our own house. Our garage
You should
has
really put gutters on your house.
well,
that would probably solve it.
It'd
it's
probably
an
help
HOA.
it.
I can't go against the HOA. But the water that comes off the edge
Especially
of the
when
building,
it's all old people.
yeah, I
Peter,
should not
Peter
have
lives
gone
in an
anywhere
over
down
50
this
community.
path.
So let me ask you a question, because I think this is what Joe would say, honestly. Why do you care?
I care. Let me finish this. That section of the concrete foundation in the garage gets soaking wet every time it rains. And on the inside of the building, the only place where there's efflorescence on the concrete floor is on that eave, which is pulling splashback up and transferring that moisture to the bottom of the above grade portion of the wall. So we're definitely got a capillary loop there from splashback, which is exactly why I think that we should paint or coat somehow the above grade portion of the concrete. Now, if you did it with something that's vapor permeable, you could just splash that up against the open edge of the bottom.
You should cut out a piece of the foundation and bake it.
Yeah. And that might work better with my wife because I don't think concrete gives off any outgassing when you bake it in the oven.
I'll tell you that when we put that in the oven at our office, literally that day, our office manager, Pamela, brought lunch for everybody. And when we were sitting down to eat, she was like, "This would have been way better if it was in the oven. I had to microwave." And I was like, dang it. I really wish that she would have said, "Can we stop the oven for a little bit?"
To put the real.
Yeah, because she brings really good food when she brings food for everybody. Can I tell you about what I think is probably the dumbest thing that I've done to the bottom edge of sheathing?
I'd love to hear this.
The first time we used Zip-R, I was really worried about bugs infiltrating the bottom edge. So we custom bent J-channel for the bottom edge of that sheathing. And so on the bottom plate, a vertical leg, horizontal leg underneath the sheathing, vertical leg on the face of the sheathing. Obviously, if it's going against the bottom plate, it has to go on before the sheathing racks into the wall.
The little gutter.
Yeah, so it was a gutter the whole time that we were building the house.
Oh,
and
boy.
so like 3 weeks into us working on the house, it was the slabless slab house. We had to go around and drill holes in the
drain
bottom of it. So like this, it's sealant behind the J channel for air sealing,
Yeah.
tape on the face of it for air sealing, sealant at the joints for air sealing, and then a bunch of drainage holes in the bottom that then we had to go back through and tape up at the end. Now it's all covered with a second WRB and it's behind brick, so like that panel's probably never getting that wet, you know.
But you know what? You actually bring up a very good point, because being in New England and renovating very old houses,
Yeah.
right? Like you go down there, I've deconstructed or have had projects where we've deconstructed 150, 160, 200-year-old buildings, and that board sheathing is fine down there. Right?
The bottom course.
It's fully intact. It's been exposed through its whole life, baked dry. And I think, your recent comment there, Jake, is like we have a tendency when we get into this building science mode, it's like we want to way overthink stuff. And like, hey, how can we solve this? How can we make this? You know what? Just leave the damn thing open. Let it get wet and let it dry. That's it. Forget about it. Don't fret over stupid stuff.
I also think we're narrowing our focus down to something that is a lower risk than what most people would be worried about too.
I mean, you put a rain screen on there. What risk are
Rain
we
screen,
really at?
buy quality materials to begin with. Don't buy bottom of the barrel agricultural OSB to build your building out of, and that little bit of moisture is not going to be the problem.
I have to say, the unprotected edge of a piece of OSB is really different than the bottom course of the solid wood sheathing.
Yeah, especially it's probably from a tree that was 400 years old
so-
when it was installed 200 years ago.
I think we have to be a little more careful because we're using wood, you know. But I think that it's interesting that we do vapor profiles for walls, you know, opaque walls, how things move this way. The toughest things are termination points, like the bottom edge of that sheathing. I think the major problem is that people don't have details that stagger the materials as they go down and have a turnout at the bottom to make sure that water coming down the face actually sheds rather than rolls back up into the sheathing. And I think all of this is going to be way more successful, you know, statistically, if you lap rather than inset or flush. I think flush is just asking for more trouble.
I think
How's that for a wrap?
I think that is a great wrap-up point. Okay, so we're not as worried as we have to be, or we don't have to be as worried as some people might think we need to be.
We need to
Just
do
like everything else, if it can dry, it's not going to die.
Oh, I like that. I hadn't
don't
heard that
die.
before. Is that new? That's pretty cool. I think I have to do a wing nut test video on how to properly bake OSB. And I'm going to have, instead of my wing nut hat, I'm going to have a baker's hat. And I'm going to do like the British baking show. Pretty
No,
cool.
It's not.
No?
Also, when you said gravimetric readings, you said weigh instead of mass. Just so we're clear, just in case anybody was screaming it.
Weight is measurement of mass. Yeah,
If we're getting scientific here.
I like it.
Thank you for watching the UnBuild It podcast today. Steve, do you have any closing remarks for us?
I do. You're not going to believe it. So, after 50 some odd years, my wife and I switched places in bed. So I started sleeping on the left side.
Uh-huh.
But I woke up the other morning and said, this just ain't right.
See how I allowed him to do that? I could have closed it out without kicking it back to him.
I thought it was something about getting up on the wrong side of the bed in the morning, but maybe another day on that one.
Could be.
Okay, until next time, have a good day.
See ya.
Bye now.